Welcome to People Behind the Power, part of the Metric Podcast Network. Data centers are the backbone of the digital world, but behind every facility, every build, and every operational decision, there are people making it happen. Every episode, we sit down with the leaders driving the data center industry forward, the careers they've built, the teams they've scaled, and what it actually takes to deliver at the pace this sector demands. A Metric DCX production. This is People Behind the Power.
Hi, this is George here with Metric DCX. We're on day 2 of Data Cloud in Cannes, and I'm joined for People Behind the Power by Buddy Rizer, who doesn't really need an introduction, but is the Executive Director of Economic Development for Loudoun County. Buddy, for those that may not know you and happen to be listening to this podcast, which I imagine would be few, but please give us a very brief introduction of yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, George. Been a fan of you guys and what you do, and George and I had a great dinner, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, something like that. It was awesome. Yeah. But happy to be here. Buddy Rizer. I am the Executive Director of Economic Development in Loudoun County, Virginia, aka Data Center Alley. I've been there for, I guess, going on 20 years now, and we became the largest concentration of data centers anywhere in the world in 2016, and frankly, have only grown exponentially since then. I also do a little bit of consulting work through my company, Addix, and just really excited to be part of this industry at what I think is a critical time for the future.
We're going to get into what's next for Loudoun County and the industry and everything like that. We'll get into it, but your background is unique. Your background is fascinating. How did you get into data centers, and what did your entry into the industry look like, Buddy?
Yeah, definitely not a typical, background. I started in radio as a DJ when I was 15 years old. Amazing. And did that for the better part of 20 years, including major market radio and morning show in Washington, D.C. and those kinds of things. And I eventually reached the point where I didn't want to do that anymore. And I was trying to figure out what is it that I wanted to do. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to do public service, that I wanted to get into the community. Thought a good combination of my skills would be economic development. So took the job in Loudoun County at a time when Loudoun was not doing great. We were 81% dependent on residential real estate for our tax base. So when the housing bubble burst, we lost about a third of our tax revenue. We had been through another bubble before. We were hit hard by the tech bubble, the .com bubble in 2000. So we had these empty buildings that were built for server farms, as they called them back then. And I thought, you know what? If I can fill those first couple of buildings, then we might make something. Started talking to people in the data center industry, spent a lot of time in Seattle, a lot of time in Northern California, and eventually got somebody to take those first 3 buildings, Digital Realty, and worked with Chris Crosby on that deal. And kind of got lightning in a bottle after that, and so I'm not a technician. I'm not I'm basically an enabler. It was building the opportunity for data centers to come in and thrive, and obviously exceeded all expectations.
That was just going to be my next question. Did you ever foresee, after your idea for those first 2 buildings, and if we could just do something with them, was there anything even in the back of your mind that thought this could go the way it's gone?
No way. I mean, I don't think anybody could have guessed, right? But I did see an opportunity once we started to get a little bit of momentum. I thought, well, let's try to really formalize this. So we built a strategic plan in 2008. We defined Data Center Alley as about 3.8 square miles and thought if we did that, then we would be incredibly successful. Fast forward to today, we've gone from 19% commercial tax base to 51% commercial. We've been able to build, 32 schools and 15 fire stations and 6 libraries and miles of roads and thousands of acres of park. At the same time, we've been able to lower the tax rate by 48 cents on the dollar for our citizens. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime type scenario, right? I mean, so it was really exciting to do. and it's been really fun to watch. But if someone would have told me we would ever do that kind of thing, I would have not believed it.
I think I was wanting to get into this later, but because you've spoke about it, whenever we're talking to the developers that we partner with, community affairs, community engagement, sustainability is such a topic at the moment, and it is getting more and more contentious, if you like. And the opposition to data centers are more vocal than ever. And we really want this platform to have honest conversations, but to be like a voice of positivity in the industry, because they do so much good. And again, the developers, they have tremendous programs that do so much for the communities, and whether it's lowering utility bills or whatever it might be, so many better examples. But again, you've just given the other side of it as a person from Loudoun County, like the good that data centers have brought to your county as well. Talk to me about that for a minute.
Yeah, I would say that you're right. I cannot believe the vitriol, the conversation, the way that this has turned, especially in the last year to 6 months to a year. It has got, even in Loudoun, where, for 15 years, we didn't get any pushback on data centers. I mean, everybody was really positive because they saw the way we were transforming lives and going from a failing economy to the strongest local economy in the country. So we were really happy about all of that. But now there's this, what I call the whack-a-mole of accusations. It's like, power, water, pollution, and it's really fear-based. And when it becomes fear-based, then it becomes political-based. And so we've kind of lost control of the narrative, right? So I am trying to, wherever I work, just trying to make sure that decisions and conversations are fact-based. People talk about my energy bills are going to go up. Well, there is literally no evidence of that. My property values are going to go down. Well, your property values in Loudoun have gone up 68% in the last decade. You're using too much water. Well, we're the largest market in the world, and we use less than 10% of our entire potable water supply for data centers. Well, what about the air pollution? Well, data centers have no, layer 1 emissions. And our air quality in Northern Virginia is better today than it was a decade ago. So trying to tell that story is really tough. And, the opposition is well-funded and well-organized, and they have a playbook, and, they're out there telling those stories. And, the media tends to be playing along. We've tracked almost 4,000 articles so far in 2026, and about 70% of them have been negative, and well over half of them have had factual mistakes in the articles. So it's tough, and that's why the industry kind of has to come together and do a better job of telling that story together.
Yeah, and I think one of the motivating factors behind doing this and setting this platform up and speaking to people like you is, I will not pretend to have the technical depth of understanding that you do, but I speak to so many people in the industry every day, more than most others, and a real variety of people. And there are people involved in data center development, and they are good people. They are good people. They are not trying to negatively impact communities. They are not trying to do something untoward. Yes, there is a commercial aspect to everything that's doing, but that allows all the brilliant things to be done. But they are good people, and they are trying to positively impact things.
Right. And, and that's part of the history of this industry, right? Early on, it was just big buildings. And we've been encouraging people for, more than 15 years, go beyond the building. Look at what the people are doing. Looking at the jobs that are created, the people that are be able to come out of, what they were doing into 6-figure jobs inside the data center. Now, is there as many jobs per square foot as an office building or a manufacturing? It's not. But you can't discount the number of jobs. There's 15,000 jobs in Loudoun County in data centers. And in Loudoun, it's about one job, for every one job in the data center, about 6 jobs in the ecosystem. You think about the construction jobs, and everyone likes to say, well, construction jobs are temporary. Well, not really. I mean, if you are an electrician or if you're a, HVAC technician, you're on these campuses for a decade or so as you're building them out.
Yeah.
You're going from building to building to building. There hasn't been a day without data center construction in our community for 18 years or so. So, we're seeing electricians, about 3,000 new electricians in the last 5 years come into Loudoun County. We're seeing them starting at $65 an hour. That's life-changing for them, right? And the steady work, and to be able to use your skills in a different way, and what is the only real growth industry in the world right now, I struggle to see why that's a bad thing.
Absolutely.
It makes it really challenging to try to talk about it because people don't want to believe, especially, they don't want to believe corporate America. They don't really want to believe government anymore. But the facts are the facts.
Yeah. Buddy, you lead a large team yourself in Loudoun County. Talk to me about your approach for building high-performing teams and things that you look for that might not show up on a resume.
Yeah, I think I hire a lot of non-traditional people in economic development. I do not require economic development experience. I always say, and we say this in all of our materials, we hire awesome. You can give me somebody who's awesome, who has the relative skills, I can teach the rest. So we hire slow. We go through a process to make sure we're getting the right people on the bus, and then we fire fast. If we find somebody isn't a fit, then we don't let it linger. But to me, if you go through the right process and you try to hire people that are great, people that are engaged and passionate and are there to understand the mission and engage in the mission, we've had very low turnover in our department over the last 20 years. We have really high-performing individuals who go out and do their jobs and are successful. And it doesn't take a lot of leadership, a lot of managing. What it takes is giving them the tools to make sure that they are going to be successful, giving them that direction and letting good people go. And it's to me, it's really exciting to watch people grow. And when you're in economic development and community development in a community, and you actually get to see the work you've done paying off, like you get to see the quality of our community, one of the greatest places to live in the world, and you get to see that your work has enabled that, that's passion, right? That gives you, that covers a lot of other things. And, we like to have fun. We work hard, but we have a very light environment. Yeah. I like loud and obnoxious people. I like people being around me that are willing to have some fun and get some skin in the game. And but I love putting together a team, and I love to watch them work. And it's just one of the most rewarding things that I do.
Amazing. We, again, try and be overwhelmingly positive on here, but we like to be pragmatic as well. If you've made a mistake hiring someone, hiring goes wrong. We are people. A mistake you've made and what it's taught you about yourself or about hiring. Give me something on that.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing I've learned over the years is to give yourself the grace to make a mistake, admit when you've made it, and handle it. One of the worst things you can have for a culture of an organization is if you have somebody who's not on the same sheet of music. We had one gentleman, and one of the biggest rules we have, we respect each other at all times. We do not yell at each other. We just don't. And none of that came through in the interview, right? In the interview, we saw a lot of, positivity, and we saw a lot of energy. But eventually we found out that he just couldn't work with others. And so we took care of that. It's better for the organization, long run. It's painful. Firing people is never fun. But if you look at the whole of the organization and the important mission of what we're doing, give yourself that grace, recognize you made a mistake, but then take care of it. I think a lot of leaders, they let things fester for too long.
Yeah.
And that can be a recipe for disaster.
I'm going to ask this next question in kind of a couple of different ways. Firstly, in your team, how do you decide when you sort of have what you need internally and you can promote from within and you can progress someone and they can go into that next step or that next role versus, okay, we perhaps would be better with an external skill set here or someone coming in with new ideas or from a different background? How do you manage that? And similarly, very on topic at the moment is a shortage of data center specific experience for developers or GCs or owners or whoever it might be. Which other industries do you think data center development should be looking to take from?
Sure, I'll take the first part. You know, when I see people and I see people coming up, you can usually tell if they have leadership in them, if they are able to inspire others, if you think that they can eventually contribute more than they do today. You know, when we're hiring people, you know, I have two different categories. I say, are you a day one hire or are you a 1 year hire? You know, sometimes we need a day one hire. We need somebody that can come in and be ready to go that day. Yeah. Sometimes we have the luxury of a 1 year hire where we know that we need this skill set and we can develop that skill set. And, you know, but I would say we never hire anybody that we don't think is capable of more.
Yeah.
Right. And we do some promoting from within, but every job is completely competitive. Like, I make no assumptions that an internal candidate is going to be the person. I want to see everybody that comes in, and I want to make the best hire. I think sometimes organizations make, I call it a lazy hire. You know, it's easier just to promote from within, and we do a ton of that, but it has to be the right person, the right fit at the right time. So it is important to make sure that there is a continuity. And there's nothing better than watching somebody that, for example, I hired a kid as an intern 16 years ago. He was shy. He had a hard time, you know, expressing himself at first. Then you started to see him come out of his shell, and you found out that he was actually funny. And then you found out that he was as smart as can be, right? Eventually you started to see him, you know, pull people aside and say, no, I think you should do it this way. Today, he's a manager in our office. Yeah. And no one would have predicted that when he first started. But sometimes you do have to go out of house for a skill set that you're looking for that you don't have internally. Or, you know, you have to go out and make sure that you get the right person for the right job. Now, to your second question, yeah, today is an unusual market because we're starting to see so many different jobs that are going unfilled, that the skill sets aren't there, that there isn't enough backlog for the people that are in the industry that are retiring and those kinds of things. So for me, it's really about workforce development. You know, it's trying to take a more global view of how do we start to prepare programming that gets people ready for these things. You know, we have in Loudoun put a real emphasis on trades. You know, and there was a time when people would not want their kids going into the trades. You know, everybody needs to go to college, right?
Yeah.
Well, not really. Not everybody. There's different pathways to success.
Yeah.
And you know, and we see that. So I'm on the board of Northern Virginia Community College, and you know what we have done with our data center operations program. You know, introducing people to what it's like to work in a data center and what the opportunities are. We work through K through 12, and we work, you know, it's showing that opportunity. You know, people, even our age, much older than you, but my age, your age, no one at that point when we were in school thought data centers was going to be an opportunity, right? Nobody saw that. But today, you know, you can point to really good jobs and really big opportunities. So it is evolving people into those roles and showing them and exposing them to them. And I think that that's really important right now, and trying to make sure that we have the workforce that we need going forward. That's a big part of what economic development is. Yeah. You know, you get the headlines for the big wins and those kinds of things, but building that workforce for the future is critical to helping companies grow and bringing new companies into your community.
Yeah, and the opportunity is great and it's very real. I think on that observation, and another selling point for people wanting to get into the industry, we obviously look at an awful lot of resumes, an awful lot of LinkedIn profiles, and what we see in this industry more than most, because it's growing so aggressively, but I think because there is generally a shortage of people because it's still relatively new.
It is.
In the broadest sense, we see people progress incredibly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are SVPs now that were project managers 6 years ago.
Yes.
I think if organizations get people who they can see, wow, this person's brilliant, they're committed, they're sharp, they get it. Like, people can progress so quickly and entirely change their lives. Like you say, an electrician that was going from job to job making this is now doing this.
Yeah.
And it is life-changing without being sort of hyperbolic.
I met a kid at one of our data centers last week, and he started as a security guard, sitting out front, checking people's IDs, but he committed himself to learning the industry. And the company, and I'll say the name, Sabi Company, committed to helping him and helping him learn. Today, he oversees all operations, and, didn't really get educated for that in the traditional sense, but educated himself with the help of his employer, and has gone from, a $10 an hour job sitting at the front desk doing security checks to literally a 6-figure job running operations and managing a team. Those kind of stories in this industry are more common than you think.
Yeah.
But it's about getting people engaged in that, and then, rewarding great behavior and rewarding that ambition.
Skill set that you think is most sought after within data center development at the moment? Could be a function, could be a specific role. Anything that springs to mind?
Well, we still struggle with the trades. And, there's a lot of the more technological skills that we're still trying to get to, right? I mean, think about when we were hiring in data centers 3 years ago. It's a different skill set we're looking for today with the adoption of AI, and how is that going to integrate? And, things are moving really, really fast. So I would say the number one thing is adaptability and a willingness to learn. If you can do that, you can figure out what interests you and where your career takes you. Because what we're seeing is a lot of non-traditional career paths in the data center industry. Like you said, somebody starts as a project manager and then finds themselves, on the front page or in the main stage, as a CEO, CFO, senior leader.
Yeah.
It's possible in this industry.
It is. And I think that answer has been a really common theme, being adaptable and being willing to adapt, because things are still happening so quickly. Things change day to day, week to week, month to month. The timelines are being brought forward. Everything is so fast,
right,
that things do change. And if you can move with it and still contribute and still get closer to that line, you make yourself incredibly valuable.
And positivity matters.
Yeah.
Right? It can be cliche that, you and I are both really positive guys, right? But positivity matters, because if you think something can happen, more or less, you're going to make it happen, right? More times than not. So, coming in with that good attitude and that willingness to learn and that willingness to adapt is critical.
Buddy, your career has been incredible up to this point.
Luckiest man in the world.
Yeah, well, aren't we all to be in this industry? Yep. It's amazing. What is next for you? What do you still want to achieve? And I'm going to couple that with what is coming for Loudoun County? What is coming for Northern Virginia? Because there is so much talk. There has been so much done already. What is next? Is there more?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I think that it's been a while since I've had to work, right? So I work because of my passion for what I'm doing. And I'd like to continue as long as I maintain that passion. I'm one of these people that get up every day excited to go to work, excited for that opportunity and looking at that. I very much enjoy my work in Loudoun County. We are at the end of the data center run. We're pretty much out of land. We are out of power, so, I mean, we're, the industry, I think, is in the early innings of a baseball game. We're probably in the 8th inning. I mean, we don't have that much more to go. But I think that there's so much further to go in this industry that I want to be part of. I want to share what I've learned through the last 20 years, and I want to speak for sanity and fact-based decision making. And I want to be able to show communities what a difference this can make. I go to some communities and, their entire budget would be doubled by a couple of data center buildings. That's meaningful when you think about what does that mean for education? What does that mean for public services? What does that mean for health and safety? One of the places I was 3 weeks ago, said to me, we need an ambulance. Our community needs an ambulance. Well, guess what? If you get the right investment in your community, that's not going to be a problem for you anymore. It'll meaningfully change people's lives. So, I want to continue my advocacy work in the area of data centers. I want to continue to find ways to contribute to the future that I think is incredibly important. And as far as Loudoun goes, we're kind of, we're in a great position to continue to succeed. We have the DC Metro that has come into Loudoun County now. We have greenfield developments where I want to put mixed-use developments and create a sense of place and do those kinds of things. So I'm excited both for what I am doing and what I want to do going forward.
I mean, we touched on it earlier, but the importance of community engagement, community affairs at the moment, I think you're going to be busy for as long as you want to be, Buddy.
I see my place as, that intersection of digital infrastructure and community. Because how the community thinks and talks about things is completely different than how industry thinks and talks about things. And having somebody that can bridge that, I think, is just incredibly important in today's world. Because I understand what a community is looking for, and I understand how it could be taxed and how that money can be spent and what it can mean. But I also understand from a industry's perspective what's important to them. That certainty of process and that time to market and that support that you need to get your projects up and going. And making these a win-win is something that I think is incumbent upon me as somebody who has that experience on both sides.
Amazing. I know this isn't your intention, but if you were to leave the industry tomorrow, Buddy, what does your successor look like? What are really important characteristics for, again, not even your successor specifically, but someone who is going to perform in a role like yours very well? What allows them to do that?
Well, I think that you have to put your ego aside and understand all the parties in the room. It's how do you make sure that you're hearing from both sides or all sides? For me, there's the government, and then there's the community, and then there's industry. You have to understand where all those concern points are going to be. So it has to be somebody that has the ability to listen and process information and can be empathetic. That's less common than you think. To have somebody that is willing to understand and go, you know what, you've got a good point there. Let me talk to these people and see what we can do about that. And then, over here, well, I understand that this is a challenge, but we need to communicate to our citizens over here. So that would be my broader thing. Inside Loudoun, we've been thinking succession planning all along. So building a really strong team and having a group of leaders that can look to the future, I think puts us in a great path to continued success. But I think that what we want to see, both in the industry and what I want to see for the future of Loudoun County, is to have people in those positions that are passionate, that are ethical, that are responsive, that are willing to go out when it's hard.
Yeah.
Listen, my favorite thing in the world isn't going to community meetings and having people, complain about everything I do.
Yeah.
But I also understand that it's important that they have their say. I'm currently working on a project that I call structured transparency, because I think government does a good job of being transparent, but we don't always let that information out in a way that it's accessible to everybody, right? I mean, how many times has there been, 6 public hearings and an entire process, and there's a vote on it, and then somebody says, I didn't even know that was happening. That happens all the time in local government because people have lives. They're not stuck to, following the latest land use application. So structured transparency will be a concept which not only has the information available, which it is today, but proactively tries to make sure that information is pushed out so that people understand the realities of those situations. So I'm excited about that part as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Buddy, we want this podcast, this platform, to be interesting to a lot of people. We want it to be interesting to people that are interested in data centers, but we also really want it to be interesting to people in the industry.
Sure.
For your successor on this platform, who would you want to hear from? And it can be a couple of names if you want, but who would you find it really interesting to listen to answer these kind of questions?
Well, I think, there's some categories, right? There's the real thought leaders that are, looking to the future and how we're going to address the challenges and how we're going to get there. The CEO of Digital Bridge, Mark Ganzi, if he's speaking somewhere, chances are I'm going to be right there in the front row because I learn every time.
Yeah.
He's brilliant, and he has so much of this figured out. Other CEOs like, Andy Power at Digital or Chris Crosby at Compass, and, those guys are also, really, really bright. People that have energy experience, because, it used to be people would chase fiber or people would chase land. Right now, everybody's chasing power, and we have a deficit in power. We're behind. We're in the United States. We're producing maybe 5 gigawatts a year, and the industry is leasing, 10, 12 gigawatts a year. How do we get there? So I would like to hear from somebody who's really smart around nuclear, like maybe one of the principals at Oklo. Because right now we have to figure out how to engage all of those different things. I think that's important. And I always want to hear from, the younger people in the industry and what are they thinking, because their perspective on this is so much different than mine, or so much different than those of us who have been around a while. So, keep an eye on those up and comers. I know Karen Petersburg is one. There's others that are out there that are big thinkers that are just figuring it out. And that's going to be the future. Like, they're going to come up with the ideas and solve the future problems. So, I'll be watching. So, anytime you get a great guest on here, I'll be watching. But I think that trying to understand where those opportunities are for continued growth and then identifying people that are ahead of the curve on those makes for an interesting conversation all the time.
But at the end of every episode, quick fire round, 3 questions. First thing that comes into your head.
Okay.
Firstly, best career advice you've received?
Don't be afraid to fail. Early on, I think I was very afraid to fail, and took everything really very seriously, and probably overworked situations. And I had a boss. His name was Rick Mack, and this was when I was still in radio. And he looked at me one day and he said to me, "You know what your problem is? You've never had a failure. Like, you don't understand what it means to fail, get back up, and get better." Yeah. And so, we shouldn't be afraid to fail. And And I think that kind of liberated me to do bigger things and to think bigger and to not just be safe all the time with how I approach things. And obviously, it's paid off at a lot of different levels. You know, I mean, to think 20 years ago, I said, you know what, we should go after data centers when most people didn't even know what a data center was. Yeah. You know, that could have easily failed. Didn't. Happy. But being afraid to take that chance is probably the thing that I've learned most.
Okay. One trait every leader in our sector needs in 2026?
Transparency. You know, it's our industry has long suffered from secrecy, not putting our names on billings and, you know, not addressing things. And we're paying for that now. Empathy in every leader is so important. Being able to understand other perspectives is really, really key. And I think enthusiasm, you know, being able to have an enthusiasm for what you do. Enthusiasm is one of the most contagious things out there. You know, if you can bring enthusiasm and get other people excited about things, it's a game changer. So I think, you know, I know you asked for one, I gave you three, but you know, I'm an overachiever.
Yeah. We'll take three from you, buddy. One book, person, or podcast that has influenced your thinking recently?
I'm going to overachieve here. You know, the book that I have recently read that just has me my head spinning is Andrew Ross Sorkin's 1929. You know, because I'm reading it. It's about the Great Depression and how we got there. But it's a story unlike you've ever heard about it. You know, great reporting, great writing. And so I'm looking at those kind of, you know, history doesn't repeat but rhymes type of opportunities to watch these things. So that was really good. I'm currently rereading for probably the 10th time Andrew Bloom's Tubes, about the early days of the internet. And I like to touch base on that because it reminds me, how did we get here, right? How did we get there? And I like to read things that I don't always agree with or expands my thinking. You know, Abundance by Ezra Klein was, you know, I don't agree with everything in the book, but understanding how to leverage the abundance of things that we have and how we need to get to more solutions for the future. I think all three of those have kind of, in the last 6 months, have really had an impact on me.
Amazing. Buddy, thank you. I really appreciate you giving us a bit of time and coming out here.
My pleasure.
There are worse places to meet again than Cannes.
You know, it's the life we lead.
Yeah, for all our sins. But again, thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
It's my pleasure. Great conversation.